Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Okanagan College. My name is Neil Facina, and I have the distinct pleasure of being the president of this amazing institution. And it's my pleasure today to also welcome all of you to Okanagan College, and either as part of your regular day, or if you're a guest here, we're thrilled to have you with us. To start off in a good way, I want to acknowledge with gratitude that we are gathering today on the traditional and unceded territory of the Syilx Okanagan people, who have been the stewards of this land since time immemorial. This afternoon, we have the honor of hearing from a panel of speakers who will share their perspectives, experiences, and insights into why it is so important that we mark Transgender Day of Visibility. Established in 2009, this internationally observed day is a time to honor transgender people and to raise awareness of the discrimination and challenges they continue to face, with the objective that we, together, can make positive change. Okanagan College is firm in our commitment to being a welcome, supportive, and space for all learners. This commitment isn't just words on paper, it's reflected in our actions that includes creating opportunities and spaces for discussion that will lead to shared understanding and allyship. An indication of the number of people that have come out, not only in our theater today, but for everyone joining online, to be able to take part in this conversation, and just acknowledging how important conversation it is. And we're drawing celebrities like the president of our OCFA to come out for this this important discussion. I do want to take just a moment to thank OC's EDISJ working group and the committee that organized today's event. And it is now my privilege to introduce to you and welcome our panel's host. Oh, then it's over to you for territory. My apologies.
No worries. Yeah, so I can do, I'll do the welcoming to our traditional territory. And so I'll get introduced in a minute, but so I'm a member of the Syilx Nation. I'm from the West Bank First Nation community of the Syilx Nation. And so I just want to thank you for the land acknowledgement that you shared. And some of you may have heard the welcoming that I'm going to do, or you may have heard my mother, Pamela Barnes, do it in many different places. So you may have heard it, some of you may not have heard it. But the first thing I'll do is I'll just share a little bit about the difference between a land acknowledgement and being welcomed to the traditional unceded territory of the Syilx Nation. So a land acknowledgement is something that everybody should be doing on these lands, and it's simply acknowledging the Syilx people and the Syilx Nation as your host. And so it's kind of like if you go to your neighbor's house for dinner, you recognize your neighbors as the host, and thank them for their hospitality. And so that's essentially what a land acknowledgement is. Being welcomed to our traditional territory is another protocol, and so I want to share that with you. And the first thing I'll share is that it's not a casual thing. And so I want to share with you a little bit about what our lands mean to us. And so our lands are made up of the blood and the bones of our ancestors for thousands and thousands of years. And so all of this land is sacred to us, not just a little spot here and another little spot here. It's all sacred to us. And when we're out on the land, we have that reverence, as if you might, when you're walking in a cemetery, we have that reverence that we're literally walking on the blood and the bones of our ancestors. When newcomers first came, an idea about land ownership, was brought to this territory. And so I just want to share from the Syilx perspective, we view it differently, where I don't have anything. My mom usually has a necklace or something. I have this iPad. And so if in our worldview, we see it more as that we're borrowing this land and we're borrowing it from future generations. And so if I own this iPad, I can take good care of it, or I can toss it aside. I can do whatever I want with it. It's mine. I can sell it. I can trade it. I can give it away. I can do any of those things because it's mine. But when I borrow this iPad, everything about that changes. I can't sell it. I can't trade it. I can't give it away. And even more importantly, I'm expected to return it, or when I leave it or return it, for it to be in the same condition and, if possible, better. And so that's how we, view our relationship with these lands, that we're borrowing it from those future generations. And so it's with that understanding that we first welcomed newcomers to our territory around 200 years ago. And it's with that understanding that today I welcome you to the traditional, unceded, and currently occupied territory of the Syilx Nation, with the, at this point, urgent reminder that none of us, including ourselves as Syilx people, none of us are doing the best job that we can to take care of the land, the water, all the life it contains for all of our future generations. So with that, I welcome you here. I'm very grateful to have you all here and hope we enjoy our evening together. Liemlimt.
I have to say, I've heard your mom do that land welcoming before, and she'd be proud. That was an awesome addition to our cultural knowledge here. So thank you. All right, so now shifting just slightly back over to introduce our panel host. She has been into Summerland since she was 5 years old and has been part of our OC community since 1994 when she entered our general arts program. So thrilled as an alumni to have you here. She is the operations manager for the Time family of wines, having long worked in the industry with her own family, including her late father, Harry McWatters, and her sister, Christina Lee. She's an athlete, an author, a public speaker, a philanthropist, an advocate, and an activist for equity, diversity, and inclusion. She's the former director of transgender community involvement for Kelowna Pride Society and is the current vice president of Advocacy Canada. She came out to herself as a transgendered female in September of 2017 and to the world in January of 2018. I'm happy to introduce to you a true inspiration, Darrien McWatters.
Thank you very much, and thank you for attending in person and on the webinar to our discussion panel for Trans Day Visibility, and speaking from our experiences. And I'm going to keep it fairly light and moving along and share some of our experiences. I'll touch just a little bit about, like I say, myself. I'm just a month and a half shy of the big half-century mark, so a little bit older than the rest of the panel here, I think. And it was, at 43 years old that things were just bottled up inside me and I had to figure out what was going on. And it was a very good friend of mine who was an educator actually at Mount Boucherie. And she is now on the island, and I still stay very much in touch with her. And she helped me basically kind of put it all together. And as an educator, this is why I'm a huge supporter of resources such as SOGI 123, as that resource gave me the wealth of knowledge, the terminology to start pulling things out of my head and piece it all together that I was transgender. As well, a few months after that, the most difficult discussion I ever had in my life was sitting my two teenage boys down and explain to them what was going on. They were 14 and 16-year-old teenage boys at that time. And I had the kind of a glossary of terms saying what I was going through, what I was feeling, and that this was me. And they were like, yeah, we get that. We learned that in school. We know exactly what you're talking about. Okay, that's cool. And that's pretty much how that conversation went. Okay, well, I'm going to go meet a friend for drinks. So, and because of those resources, again, that's why I'm a huge advocate of, supporting all of that. Sometimes it's not about just for those students to learn about themselves and their peers, but, my kids learned about who I was because of those resources. And it's about learning about other people and respecting other people as well, which is a big part of why we're here today. When I came out publicly, it was a big decision because I knew that with my family and my background in the wine industry that my dad was pretty well known, and he was a bit conservative, but he loves family. He loves his kids, his grandkids, and that wasn't going to change. but I was always concerned about how would that impact the business because of our visibility. And our winemaker at the time, he said to me, he said, don't ever be concerned about how the business would do, and don't hide because you're concerned about the business. Said, if it trickles down a bit, it goes, we don't need those customers. We want our customers to totally respect the diversity of who we are and what we stand for. And so when I came out, that it prompted me to use that visibility for even more. I was and still continue to be a hockey official, and continued that through my transition, and using that platform of visibility as a transgender hockey player and hockey official to amplify that and show that in a very tough cultural and sport like hockey, that it can be welcoming. And that's a big challenge today, but it's also one of the reasons why I was actually appointed a year ago to the brand new work group with BC Hockey on equity, diversity, and inclusion, and as well why I'm an advisor to Hockey Canada Gender Expression. So coming out and showing my visibility has opened up more and more doors, and I try to use that visibility and that voice to speak for those that don't have that voice or are afraid to come out or don't have the circumstances that I did at the time, to show that, we are as normal as somebody with red hair and blue eyes. In fact, somebody that has red hair and blue eyes is probably more rare than the percentage of people that are transgender. We just don't realize it. So I'm going to share with you the rest of the panel here. To my immediate left, we have Kenny, and Kenny goes by he, they, they, and speaks about dissociative identity disorder, and speaks to high school students about DID, substance abuse, and trauma. To Kenny's left, we have Amelia Catherine. I love that name. My mother's name is Catherine, so I'm partial to that name. She has a diploma of music performance and a student of anthropology. And to her left is Jasmine, she, her as well, and is a member of the Syilx Nation, the Okanagan Nation, and is a language and cultural teacher within the community. So I'm going to pass it on to Kenny to discuss some of their experiences and visibility.
A lot of my general experiences in life have been, I'm trying to think of a good way to explain it. I was actually talking about it with my mom and my girlfriend and my best friend. When I came out initially, I was still in high school, and that was almost 10 years ago. I remember we originally called it the Casper situation. I told one friend, McKenna, and she just said, okay, we're going to call this the Casper situation. That was what I originally went by. And then when I told my best friend, who I've known since we were very little, I was so scared because she was my everything at the time. And she just said, oh, I knew. We've all just been waiting for you to say something about it because we didn't want to tell you how you felt, but okay, glad you're out now. So I would really support our friends, and telling my family I was really, really scared about. That was something I actually left. Every time I left the house, I left a note in my room. I was so scared. And then one day I went to go put it away, and my mom saw it, and then we had a huge conversation about it. But coming out and then being in high school as the only trans person in my grade, and at the time it was really big. People either suddenly really liked me when they didn't before, and quickly I realized they were trying to be my friend either for token points, which really did hurt in the end, and I cut them off really quickly. And I noticed that a lot of people who were my friends before had suddenly distanced themselves from me, but those who I kept with me I have 3 of them now. They're absolutely wonderful people. But a lot of my struggle with being trans, I've realized when talking to the community, I kind of differed from because of my dissociative identity disorder is I really struggled with the identity aspect when I tried to connect with my fellow trans peers and trans friends I got at the time. It always ended up with a, am I really trans? Because I can't relate to this experience. And it was only when I met another person who was trans with dissociative identity disorder that I was like, oh, you get it. You really get it. It's more social. And when I started transitioning and I actually got the resources I need when I started getting the psychiatry help I needed, I became so much happier. I started to love myself and who I was and become a person that was bright again. And it was wonderful. And I've met so many people. And because of this, I continue to talk to teenagers about all this. I continue to talk to them about my experiences. And I do get asked a lot by young teens still about gender identity and how I experience that. And I do tell them honestly what my experience was and how nobody's path is the same. Nobody, not one of us will experience the same path as we transition. And I think that's what makes each of our stories so beautiful. And that was something that I've had to learn to accept myself, especially hearing everybody else's stories and never being able to find truly one I relate to. But then realizing, hey, I don't have to relate to anybody because I can just be me. I can live my own story out. And so now I talk about that. I talk about other struggles I've faced. I try to advocate for mental health and kids who, kids who've experienced trauma and substance abuse, that to reach out for resources, and young LGBT plus kids for them to reach out to resources, and that it's okay. And yeah, and I want to pass this conversation on.
To me, oh boy. Hello. I'm gonna buck the trend a little bit. I'm not going to talk about my own high school experiences or growing experiences figuring out I'm trans, at least at the moment. Instead, I'd like to read a poem for you. It's by the poet Sappho from the island of Lesbos. If you don't know who that is, she's the reason why lesbians are called lesbians. To give a brief description of her, this is a fragment, by the way. Most of her poems have been lost to time, either because of the burning of the Library of Alexandria or other reasons. So most of her stuff we only have fragments of. But to give a brief summary, it is a details the lamenting of a lover having to leave her, and Sappho sharing in her grief and telling her to go, but to remember her. Here is the poem. Honestly, I wish I were dead. Weeping many tears, she left me and said, alas, how terribly we suffer, Sappho. I really leave you against my will. And I answered, farewell, go and remember me. You know how we cared for you. If not, I would remind you of our wonderful times, for by my side you put on many wreaths of roses and garlands of flowers around your soft neck, and with fresh royal perfume you annotated yourself on soft beds. You satisfied your passion, and there was no dance, no holy place from which we were absent. The most interesting part about this poem for me, and all of her poems about homoerotic desire, is how the perspective constantly shifts. Sappho, when talking about her lovers in poetry, never stays within herself as the narrator. They're always given a literal voice or the one who does the actions within the poem. Take the first stanza, for instance. Honestly, I wish I were dead. Weeping many tears, she left me and said, alas, how terribly we suffer, Sappho. I really leave you against my will. Notice how, while we only have a fragment remaining of the broader picture, it starts focusing on Sappho's desire that she wish she were dead, but that the rest of the stanza focuses on the action of her lover and therefore her lover's desire. And that through both taking the position of the poem as the subject, the one who acts, the desire and the actions that constitute the poem do not belong to either one of them. It comes to belong to both of them. I wish I were dead, though spoken presumably from the perspective of Sappho, comes to constitute both desires, and both become subjects. This carries on for the entire poem. For instance, take the stanza, for by my side you put on many wreaths of roses and garlands of flower around your soft neck. Roses and flowers are a recurring theme in Sappho's poetry. They, as symbols, constitute beauty itself, but also the social skills and dress of opulence to be able to recognize beauty. Once again, while Sappho is speaking from her perspective, it is implied that the fact that her lover is, through the action of putting on and creating the symbolism of flowers, the one constructing and being discerning of Sappho's beauty. Again, this desire is shown as a mutual want and construction, that beauty is not just something someone wears, but also that to wear it and for another to see it is to imply the ability and skill for the wearer to recognize beauty when they see it. I hope you're following with me so far. In the book, Undoing Gender, the philosopher Judith Butler deconstructs the ways we are, in a sense, undone by the presence of others. They argue that through gender and sexuality and the social norms which regulate them, our self and I and we exist within a life where to be within that state is to find oneself for the other and here. That the self is in a constant flux of self-discovery, and that self-reflection is the alteration from the self into the other and vice versa. This is what Sappho's poem illustrates for us, that both her and her lover within the poem are both subjects, and that their selves, their desires, and their actions only exist within the poem because they are constructed together. There is no Sappho, who she is and what she wants, without her lover, and likewise, there is no lover without Sappho. There are many poems which center on this theme. Take, for instance, No Man is an Island by John Donne. However, this idea within No Man is an Island is constituted by the idea of loss, and Butler too opens their arguments in Undoing Gender by centering grief. What I hope to show is that by centering on art by a woman who loved other women, is that this does not just apply to grief. Sappho demonstrates through her poetry that gender and sexuality are the cultural lenses that let us understand our desires. It gives us a voice in how to navigate our bodies and our desires. How Sappho and her lover construct and navigate their love is only processed through gendered bodies and what that are considered real. But what would it mean for a body to not be able to give voice to its desires? What happens when a language and a culture does not have space for yours? If the desires your body has do not fit within the norms, it is seen as impossible. It is in essence, it is unhuman, and does not constitute a language to express or construct that desire with another. In Bodies That Matter, Judith Butler calls these unlivable bodies, contrasted by livable bodies. Trans bodies and their messy constellations occupy this space. There is no language, no, as I like to call it, a map of how to navigate our bodies. When I, or anyone, not just trans, claims I am a woman, we are expressing bodies ought to be interacted with in public life, how our desires are constituted within our lives, and how we love other people. Some people might respond to the fact that I can voice this desire is in fact a refutation of this idea. Consider, however, that the other two panelists that we just had speaking both quite literally expressed that they did not have the language until they learned the language, and that visibility, the process of constantly giving voice not just to ourselves, but to the historical process and the way we construct gender together, is an important piece in making sure that people are seen and loved and desired. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that, Emmy. So my name again is Jasmine Peone. My Syilx name means little ancient one, bridge between the old and the new, and it's also one of our words for ancestors. For my experience, some people know from very young that they're trans from the time they can talk about it. And then for some people, it's, later in life you figure it out. And for some people, it's more of a process and a journey over time. And so for me, it was a lot more of a process over decades of my life. And I remember as a kid, I liked playing with Ninja Turtles. I liked Army Men, all of those things. But I had a sister who's 4 years older than me. And, so I also played with Barbies. I played with ponies, all of those things, which of course anybody can play with. But reflecting back, there were things that in hindsight, you can see all the dots in my life. When I was about 8 or 9, again, we didn't have a lot of the words for trans identities, for queer, trans folks, and even a lot of queer folks. I saw a lot of the trans people that I first saw were on Jerry Springer. There's a trans woman from our community that I remember. I used to live by Old Okanagan Highway in West Bank, and it's kind of a busy road. And I remember I would see her walking across the street, and she would always be getting harassed by teenagers and other folks. Some would even be, trying to jump kick her and things like that. And so that was one of my, that aside from Jerry Springer and whatnot, that was my first experience of seeing a trans person and encountering them, and that's what I saw. At 11 years old, I started stealing my sister's clothes. And, I was going through puberty at the time, and I wasn't sure what was happening. In hindsight, I can see, but, when I would steal my sister's bra and stuff it and put it on, there was a really big sense of relief. I could feel, my brain subconsciously was expecting, a female puberty and to develop breasts and all of that. But consciously, I didn't fully understand what was happening. But what I did know is that there was that real immense sense of relief, at least partially. And I'm also bisexual, and so again, liking girls and liking women, that also helped delay my full realization of what I was struggling with, because I was able to put my attraction to men. I was able to, put it back in a corner somewhere and, focus on girls. And then, I was very different from the youth I grew up with. They had a lot of that, I don't know, I refer to it as male game or whatever, knowing how to, go after who they're trying to be with. And I just didn't have that. And, I struggled with that a lot. For a while, I thought maybe I was just, one of those shy, nice kind of guys that didn't know what to say. I thought I was a cross-dresser for quite a while. So it took me a long time to kind of figure out what I was experiencing. I wasn't in my first relationship until just over 25. And I've been in 3-ish relationships in my lifetime. And each one of those relationships was like a stepping stone, a progressive stepping stone of starting to more fully understand what I was experiencing and why I was experiencing it. And I've had a few kids during that time period. They're not my biological children, but I had a close relationship with their mother, and so I ended up helping raise them from birth. And so with them, I came to a point where I understood I was trans, but still figuring out where I fit. And during a lot of that time, with my kids, like I would watch I Am Jazz, that would be on, I think, the Life Network or whatever channel that was on. So I would watch videos of Jazz Jennings and show my kids and introduce them to trans folks. And I even bought her kids' book, and I would read that to my kids. And I was kind of paving the way over time. I had no idea that I was going to transition at that point, but I was paving the way and building that, that acceptance and that embracing of trans identities with them. My longest relationship I was in was 5.5 years, and that was after those first two. And in that relationship, that was kind of brought me into the later stages of realizing exactly what I was experiencing and going through. And so, my partner was pretty supportive. I ended up coming out to her, and I came out to a few other folks. She was pretty supportive. We still had different struggles within our relationship with it, but she was supportive in a lot of ways. And then when that relationship ended, it ended in 2019. And then I had a year that I was living in the apartment that I'm in now, to kind of really soul search who I am and what I'm going to do with it. And so I ended up coming to the place where I knew I was going to transition. And so went for a drive and shared that with my kids. I had come out to them about a year before that, so they knew for a good while before I transitioned. And so then I just kind of slowly started coming out to some of the really key folks in my life, and then was preparing for the more full coming out and transitioning and everything all at once. And so I did that in June of 2020. So it's coming up on 4 years ago. I grew up doing a lot of the language and cultural teaching that I do, but for just over 10 years, ending, I believe, in 2022, I've done archaeology for West Bank First Nation. And so when I was transitioning, I was working on a construction site, monitoring as they dig through the dirt, watching for arrowheads and whatnot. And so I got to transition with construction workers and and folks like that. And so it was an interesting experience because I'm good at being able to build bridges and relate with folks and talk with them. So I was able to establish some of that beforehand. And then I let everyone know that I was going to transition. And so then, when the day came, I still had short hair, so I had a black wig that I was wearing, and I just showed up at work as myself. And I was surprisingly a lot less scared or worried than I thought I would be, and I just owned it. And I was there for a couple months on that site, and then worked on various other projects afterwards. And yeah, it just went really well, and I was surprised how well it went. I'm sure there were discussions when I wasn't there and whatnot, but it is what it is. But yeah, so that was kind of the summary of my experience, I guess, and the rest has been pretty open. I do, again, lots of teaching and presentations with lots of folks. I walk down the street and mind my business, and yeah, come to events like this and share, and I'm going to leave it there.
Thank you, Jasmine. One thing I think we see a lot in social media, and I think the four of us have expressed already how different our paths are, how different our stories are. Just wondering, did you get the agenda? Did you get the agenda? Did you get the agenda? There is no trans agenda. It's just like there is no manual on how to transition. There is no manual. Everyone's story is unique. A lot of people ask, did you always know? Like, did I always know what? That's not everybody's story, that they knew they were born in the wrong body. I like to say, well, I figured it, well, I'm still figuring it out. But in my 40s, it's like, well, I guess half my life male and now the other half of my life female. There are, as you said, a lot of, in hindsight, I used to go down, when I was a teenager and with my friends and be in Orchard Park, and, I liked fashion. Randy River was one way, but I also often thought in my head, it's like, wouldn't it be really cool if it just didn't matter what gender clothes you wore, you just could wear it? well into my coming out and transition, sharing ideas like that with my friends is like, did you ever have those ideas? And they're like, no, like that's only you, D. I'm like, okay, so at 15, that should have been clue number one, perhaps, and that might have helped with a lot of confusion throughout my life. When my friend that helped me come out with the terminology, I asked for a label after I spilled everything out to her. And she goes, well, I don't like the label. I'm like, we're Generation X. We like labels. And she said, well, if anything, I'd have to say gender fluid. And that's actually how I identified for about 8 months, because sometimes male, sometimes female. And when I came out publicly, I just allowed myself to start expressing whatever I felt like. And that was very comfortable until one day when I realized that every time I expressed the male side, I was faking it. And when I realized that I couldn't go back to expressing in male clothing, a short haircut, etc., that's when I knew it was time to fully transition. That's when I knew it was not just gender fluid, that I was a trans woman. And having that authenticity to know that that's who I was, that's when I really became truly happy. The other thing, and I don't know if people ask to explain being trans, but this is the other piece that my friend told me. She goes, trans is a Latin root word. And think of the other words that have trans in it. And trans in Latin means to cross between or cross over. We think of words like transport, transmission, translate. Every one of those is crossing from one thing, crossing over to another. And then there's the in-between, which we haven't discussed too much today. We've talked about, trans men, trans women, but the white, and that's the non-binary. And that's still part of being transgender, because it's all that space from in between the gender of male to female. And there is so much in between. And that's what we talk about spectrum. I got to probably open some kind of questions to each of you. Is that, what kind of questions kind of out there when you're going through, kind of opening up to people were common? What maybe you didn't quite like, or what did you, appreciate and understanding?
I think for questions I didn't like, especially when I first came out, was, are you sure you aren't a lesbian? And at the time, I was really struggling with sexuality. I was like, I'm pretty sure I'm not. I'm pretty sure that's not what this is. But that has to be probably one of the ones that frustrated me the most. I think another one that really frustrated me would have been trying to think how to say this in the nicest way possible. I'm not gay because I dated you. And having to be like, no, first of all, we broke up a year ago. Second of all, whatever's going on in your life right now is not my problem. Who I am now and who I used to be has no effect. I'm gonna be real here. I don't really care about what's going on in your life right now. If that's a question that you're thinking of, then I think that's something you need to look inwards on, not ask me if it makes you gay if we used to date. But in terms of questions that were really helpful, probably starting out in high school are, what were your preferred pronouns? Because nobody had ever asked me that before. So having new people meet me and be like, yo, what are your preferred pronouns? I was like, oh, you are recognizing that I am going through something and you are willing to help me here. And so I'd share, and then oftentimes it would lead to us talking about things. And then oftentimes I'd hear lots more stories about people in their lives. And then, I'd gain either a friendship or, just that another little piece to it. And I think those are questions that really helped and really frustrated me.
Thank you. And it's very valid. Something that we hear a lot in the media, especially when it pertains to trans men. And, people are asking questions like, well, how do you know you're just not a tomboy? Exactly. How do you know you're not just a lesbian? And thank you for answering that so candidly. That's such a valid answer, and one that is thrown around too lightly. Yeah. Yeah. Timmy, yourself.
Yeah. Well, okay, so I wasn't really asked a whole lot of questions because in high school, I hung around with a lot of gay people, because I was a really good ally and I just really loved hanging out with all the lesbians because they were the coolest people I knew and there was nothing going on under the surface whatsoever. But in terms and because of that, all of my friends were gay. By the time I was like, actually, I'm a trans woman, they were like, yeah, we know. But one of the things I did that stopped me for a long time to kind of wrap around a little bit is um, not the question why are you trans, but the common answer given, which you alluded to, being like born in the wrong body, was not something that I had ever related to, because what the fuck does that mean? I still, when like, to intellectualize it a bit, oftentimes I find when trans people are talking about being born in the wrong body, or people are talking about being born in the wrong body, it's often like pathologizing ourselves, like, oh, we just desperately wish we could be cis. And I had the very opposite experience, which was like, no, I fucking would love to be trans. God, I would love to be trans, but that's not, God, I can never be that. And I feel like for me, that like those kinds of questions, that like interrogating not just um like um labels, like I don't think labels are necessarily bad, but fixity, like that there is an essential essence to the thing that you are, has always been like really uncomfortable for me in a way that I can't quite, like, we alluded to like non-binary, like for years I identified as like genderqueer because I kind of like, I didn't like this essentialness to like a trans identity or whatever, so I kind of moved around it for a long time.
Thank you, Emmy. And yeah, exactly. I was just thinking as we pointed back to the flag, I think the flag needs an update, and that a little bit of moving from the blue into the pink, a little bit of pink into the white, it's not defined lines. As I always say, when you look up at a rainbow in the actual sky, do you see the lines defining everything? No, it blends, and that's, like I say, we have so many different stories, and the label's just a label, but how we feel is wonderful. Jasmine.
Um, I don't know that there was any questions that I didn't like. As I came out and as I've journeyed, as far as from people in my life and community and whatnot. I think the educator in me, I'm just always eager to, that's a little platform that I can now teach you and reach you. And so I'm just always eager for those moments, regardless of what the question is. And then again, it depends on the audience as well. I go into kindergarten classes and, I'm constantly asked, are you a boy or a girl? And my answer is simple to them. I just say I'm a girl, but I was born in a boy body. And for me, that's, that's how it feels for me. And, so I'm always eager and looking forward to answering those questions, and then being able to share my experience and share some of the things that I've learned. Some of the questions that I guess I don't like would be more questions online or from folks who are not necessarily educatable. Some are, some aren't. But you get the questions like, well, why can't I just identify as a lamp or a dog or a cat or or another race or ethnicity? And I've done a lot of looking into, there's studies on brains and structures of brain based on gender, which some of it hasn't always had trans folks in mind, but a lot of studies are finding that in general terms there are differences in structures, and then of course there's overlap. And so I often look to that when I'm answering those kinds of questions, and share that someone born in a male body can have a brain structure that is more in line or aligned with the structure that cis women generally have. And of course there's fluctuation within that itself. But I can't be born with a cat brain, and I can't be born with a lamp brain or things like that. And so even when I get those frustrating questions, not that it doesn't frustrate me, but I'm always there to give that alternative perspective and counter some of those notions or beliefs that they try to put out there. But whenever I know it's in good faith and it's someone really just seeking education, I'm always just happy to address those questions. Yep.
Yeah, thank you. And like I often say to people, you'll learn a lot in doing a 5-minute Google search before you make assumptions. And I think that's one of the biggest things, is that people make the assumptions. Probably one of the worst question out there for people to assume, have you had the surgery? I'm like, what surgery? What does that mean? We're all different. There's many things, and you may have none. Everything is individual, and it's what may or may not be triggered by potential dysphoria. And not every trans person has gender dysphoria. We talk about, excuse me, having to have a diagnosis to go through transitioning, but not everybody will have dysphoria. And even if they do, it might be something completely different. I have a friend in the hockey world in the States, and the only thing that kind of triggers her dysphoria is she has large hands, but she will always have them beautifully manicured. And for her, that's all. Do any of you have experiences where that, was there dysphoria before you realized, coming out or transitioning, or was there no gender dysphoria? And just leaving that open for you.
Well, for me, I thought I didn't have dysphoria. I was very confident, in fact, that I didn't have dysphoria. And it wasn't until I started transitioning that I was like, oh, all of these feelings that I had, actually, that I was uncomfortable with my body, were oftentimes rooted in dysphoria. But I think the important thing, and part of the thinking I've been doing, is that dysphoria is oftentimes, and was originally, a medical diagnosis, right? It was a way to pathologize trans experiences, as a way, to categorize us and medicalize us. We were the third sex, to some extent. And I think realistically, the more I think about dysphoria, and why I think lots of trans people relate to it as an experience, even though the actual medical, and anthropological and scientific side of that is shaky at best, is that it's just us, trans people, recognizing that the norms and wants and desires of our bodies rub up against the cultural expectations of us, right? That a woman is not supposed to have a beard, or a man is not supposed to have a vagina or a womb, or that kind of thing.
For me, I actually, because of my DID, I really struggle with identity and connection to my body. So dysphoria to me is something that seems so foreign. And that was one of the big things when talking to other trans people who I was friends with. When they told me about it, I was like, oh, well, I don't experience that. And going forward and learning more about myself, I realized that where I got a lot of my feelings toward my gender were not really dysphoria, but being seen as a guy, just whoever I was as Kenny, and anything then that just wasn't me. That wasn't me. That I don't know who that is. And it was a disconnect and a need to be somebody I recognized in the mirror. And so I worked with a psychiatrist as we figured out the exact terms of where this was so I could medically transition. And that was a really, really rough couple of years where, with the mental health issues and also all this, it was a struggle where I had to be like, look, I don't know what you want from me because you clearly have an idea of what trans people are. And clearly I'm not fitting this bill that you have of me. And then I got older, I met new people, and realized that a lot of what I feel is gender euphoria. When people recognize me as masculine or just as Kenny, I get the euphoria of, yeah, that's me. You're recognizing me as just a guy. And that's where I really stand on it is, again, everybody's story is different. And yeah.
Thank you, Kenny. And I just, before I go to you, Jasmine, as you touched on saying gender euphoria, that's where we're not putting enough emphasis on, is we're always talking about dysphoria. Dysphoria is it's a disorder, but the gender euphoria, the euphoric feeling of just being authentic, knowing who you are. And I so relate to it. Euphoria, I love this. I mean, this is who I am. When people ask about binary or non-binary, it's like, oh, I'm binary, girl. Like, I'm as female as you can put it. I love this. And this is what euphoria feels like. Jasmine.
I've experienced a lot of dysphoria in my lifetime. And really starting again back to puberty and being 11, which was in 1996, just to put that out there. But yeah, you know, again, my subconscious brain was expecting a female puberty, and so as that didn't happen, and I consciously didn't know what was going on, it was, you know, it was a confusing time for me. You know, not having body parts that I needed. You know, I grew up with some pretty rough folks, some guys and whatever, and I just knew that I was experiencing things very differently than they were in many regards. And you know, as I was going through my puberty, you know, my needs have during those times and after, you know, all the way along afterwards, you know, I didn't have the body that fit the needs that I had. And so I really struggled with that, trying to figure out what to do with that and how to navigate it. You know, again, I did have attraction to females, but I could again recognize that it was very different than what the folks around me were experiencing, and you know what their needs were. And so it just, you know, I lived with that and wrestled with that for a long time. As I got into, you know, when I would steal my sister's clothes, and you know, my mom sold Mary Kay and things like that. So as I had access to all of those things, you know, those would alleviate the dysphoria. to a certain extent, and would bring me some of that euphoria of, you know, getting to feel like, this is, you know, this feels right, and whatnot. As I moved into my relationships, you know, again, I continued struggling with, you know, with my body and with it not fitting what my needs were. You know, I struggled with certain aspects of intimacy with partners, of, you know, being expected and expecting myself to play a male role, and that just not working for me. And so, you know, I've really had a hard time with those aspects. I've you know, things like my, you know, hairy arms. My dad's pretty hairy. You know, lots of those things would give me dysphoria. My facial hair, I've had electrolysis now where it's pretty much gone, most of it. You know, a lot of those things gave me dysphoria, and as I've been able to transition and, you know, address aspects that I've been able to address, a lot of that has been alleviated. You know, there's still dysphoria there. I used to be really dysphoric with my voice. You know, that's kind of gone to sleep for the most part. So I've kind of just been coming to a place where I'm more and more at peace with my body. And I do have a lot more euphoria in my life through my transition. But there's, you know, there's still aspects that linger, and there's, you know, there's things you can't change. There's, you know, there's just aspects that are always going to be there. And so, yeah, that's been my experience so far.
Thank you, Jasmine. And, you know, I asked some of these questions because these are some of the questions that kind of brought out a lot, whether in mainstream media or social media, or even in research papers that, you know, and I think dispelling some of the myths that are out there that, you know, everyone has to feel a certain way. I mean, this is just four of us with four very different stories, and stories in so many different ways that,
and if I can just add one piece to that, I guess one way I like to share of like what my dysphoria has felt like, you know, going back to puberty and since then prior to my transition, you know, my body expecting to have boobs, and you know what it feels like for me is similar to someone who's had an amputation, and then, you know, often people will have phantom limb where you can feel what's supposed to be there, but it's not. And so that's, you know, that's just one way I use to describe what that feeling is like. And then it's kind of the opposite, you know, with the parts you do have that don't fit. It's, you know, you definitely feel that there, and but you feel what's supposed to be there. And so I just wanted to add that tidbit to what I was sharing. Thanks.
Thank you. I'm going to add a little bit about what some of my dysphoria was, and it wasn't extreme. It wasn't obvious to me. And that's, you know, again, a myth. It's some things aren't very obvious. When I decided to transition and what level of transition I wanted to go through, it was just what I felt I had to do, not because things were dysphoric. I just wanted to feel, you know, as a cis female would. I have had gender affirmation bottom surgery, and when I came home, because my little room had a very small mirror, so I actually never got a full length image of myself until I came home. And when I came out of the shower one day at home and saw myself for the first time in a full length mirror, it wasn't like it clicked that there wasn't dysphoria there anymore, or whether it was there to begin with at a certain part. And it's really hard to explain, but for the first time in my life, this puzzle solved itself in its head, because my eyes looked at that image in the mirror from head to toe, and all of a sudden came right back to my brain. And my brain just told me, finally, everything matches. And it was this feeling I was not expecting. And it's just, you know, I knew that everything in my journey was so right for me, just because that brain finally said, it matches. This is what you were hoping for. This is what you were seeking all your life. And it was a pretty amazing moment. I think we're going to open it up to some questions. No, go ahead. Go ahead. No. Okay. Jasmine, you wanted to share a story.
Yeah, I have a story I can read if folks are up for it. It takes 10-ish minutes or so. And so this is a story that I wrote while I was doing archaeology on the other side of the bridge. And I wrote it in 2021, I believe it was. And so first the title came to me, and the title is "Your Ancestors Love You Just As You Are." And then for about a month, I let the story kind of just unfold and come to me. And then one evening, I ended up just writing it out. So, your ancestors love you just as you are. Hello, my name is Olivia. I am 11 years old. I live with my Toom mother and my Stimtima mother's mother. I call my Stimtima Tima for short. I am a girl, just like any other girl. The only difference is, unlike most girls, I was born with a body. It's been hard for me because most people think I'm a boy and find it weird for me to live as a girl. Even my Toom and Stimtima didn't know I was a girl, not until last school year. I would wake up and get dressed in boy clothes and go to school as a boy, but I always wanted to be like the other girls. I wanted to have sparkly barrettes, a hair in a ponytail like them. I wanted to wear the pretty clothes that they wore, and I wanted to play with them at recess, but not as a boy. I really just wanted everyone to know I was a girl. One morning I woke up, and after putting on my boy clothes, I looked in the mirror. Like always, I saw a boy staring back at me. I didn't like seeing a boy in my reflection, and I often wished that how I looked on the outside matched with who I was on the inside. I decided that I needed to start making that happen, only I was afraid of what everyone else would think. I went into the kitchen where my Toom was cooking breakfast and my Tima was sitting at the table. Toom, I asked, is it okay if I wear my hair in a ponytail today? Why would you want to do that? Aren't you worried that the other kids will make fun of you? She answered. Then my Tima spoke up. You can wear your hair any way you like, she said. She took my brush and brushed my hair, and instead of making the braid that she normally did, she made it into a nice, fluffy ponytail. I was so excited, but suddenly a flash of fear swept across my face as I thought about the kids at school. Don't worry, my Tima said. Your ancestors love you just as you are. When I got to school, some of the kids laughed and began to tease me, even calling me names. My friends wouldn't play with me at recess, and I started to feel like I wanted to hide. I decided to just get through the day and hope that tomorrow would be better. I imagined myself with a girl body and thought about what it would be like if everyone could just see me as a girl. When my Toom picked me up from school, I cried all the way home. The next morning, I put on my usual boy clothes and again looked in the mirror. That same boy kept staring back at me like a suit of armor, concealing the person underneath. I hated not being able to see myself. As I glanced away from the mirror, I saw 2 sparkly purple barrettes that my cousin had left a while back. I didn't like people making fun of me, but I didn't like not being able to see myself even more. I took those 2 barrettes and went into the kitchen. Toom, I asked, is it okay if I wear these 2 barrettes in my hair? But what if the other kids tease you? You were pretty upset when you came home yesterday, she answered. Again, my Tima spoke up. If you like barrettes and want them in your hair, then that is very much okay, she said. She brushed and put it in a ponytail and helped me put in the barrettes. I was very excited, but I was also scared about going to school. Don't worry, my Tima said. Your ancestors love you just as you are. But who are my ancestors? I asked. Our ancestors are all of our people that lived on this land before us. They watch over us. When I got to school, everyone laughed even harder than they did the day before. They teased me, made fun of me, and not just at recess, but also in class. My best friend James even called me a girly boy. My teacher had a talk with him out in the hall. I put my head in my arms and cried on my desk. I couldn't wait for the day to be over. When I woke up the next day, I put on my boy clothes and went to the mirror. I hated the boy I saw on the outside, and I hated that I was a girl stuck on the inside. I simply just hated it. I left the barrettes on the counter and went into the kitchen. Can you put my hair in a braid? I asked my Timma. Sure, she said, and she brushed my hair and made it into a braid. Before my Timma could say anything, I rushed out the door and headed for school. The kids mostly left me alone, but they still didn't play with me. I felt very out of place and wondered why I had to be born so different from everyone else. When we came back in from recess, our teacher announced that we had a guest speaker. It was my Timma. I was very confused. I didn't know she would be here, and I didn't know what she would be teaching us. We gathered in a circle on the floor and listened with curiosity. A long time ago, our ancestors lived on this land, she started. They lived in balance with the plants and animals and all of the earth. Boys and girls respected each other and lived as equals, she continued. Sometimes, a person would be born with a body that was different from who they were on the inside. A girl could be born with a boy body, a boy could be born with a girl body, and some people would feel like a mix of both boy and girl. Our ancestors loved these people and treated them with just as much respect as everyone else. They were free to show on the outside who they were on the inside, and they could live and do what they felt. She paused and then carried on. When newcomers came to this land, they had mostly forgotten about living in balance with the earth. Boys had forgotten to treat girls equally, and people who were born with bodies that didn't match their insides were treated very badly. Most of them kept their insides hidden. Many of the newcomers also treated our people badly. They taught us not to respect the earth, each other, or people who were born different from us. Luckily, she said, many of our people still remember our old teachings, and many of the newcomers are beginning to remember that they too come from the earth. People from all around the world come from the earth and have ancient teachings about living and treating everyone and everything respectfully. Those of us that remember these teachings can help each other and help those who have forgotten. Each one of us is special, whether we are a girl, a boy, a mix of both, and even if our outside is different from our inside. Our ancestors love us just as we are. My Timma yawned, and with that, the school day was over. My Toom came to pick us up, and on the drive home, I decided it was finally time to share my inside with them. I know you've both always known me as a boy, I said, but I've actually always been a girl. I need to start living as myself. My Timma reached her hand into mine and gave me a warm smile. We got home, and I spent the evening thinking about what my Timma had said. I imagined all of the girls with boy bodies who lived before me and all of the ones who are living now. I was comforted knowing I wasn't the only one and that it was okay to be me. The next morning I awoke and was about to get dressed. When I looked beside my bed, I couldn't believe my eyes. Laying on top of my dresser full of boy clothes was a beautiful, brand new ribbon skirt. It was black with purple and pink ribbons sewn onto it. There was a purple shirt beside it. I happily got dressed and looked in the mirror. Though that boy was still there, I could finally see myself shining through. I picked up the two sparkly purple barrettes and went into the kitchen wearing my new outfit. Do you like the skirt I made you? My Toom asked. I love it, I said with pride. My Timma brushed my hair into a fluffy ponytail and helped me put in my barrettes. When I got to school, all of the kids smiled and waved to me. They invited me to play with them, and even James was to see me. When we got to class, I stood up and reintroduced myself. My name is Olivia, and I am a girl, I said confidently. Then James stood up. I'm sorry that we were all mean to you, and we are very happy to have you as our friend, he said kindly. We love you just as you are. I began to cry, but this time they were very happy tears. For the first time, I felt like everyone could see me, the real me, and I just didn't want this day to end.
Thank you, Jasmine, for that story. Very, very lovely story. I don't know if we have on the webinar, if we have questions on there, but if we have questions from the audience for any of us up here? A very quiet crowd today. Is there any other comments you guys would like to make in any kind of closing and just kind of sharing some stories?
Yeah, I feel like because lots of us seem to be, I don't want to speak for everybody, going towards a sort of binary transition that we've talked a lot about, it from the experience of being perceived as binary trans people. But I do want to stress that I think it's important, that oftentimes, I feel like that our experiences are centered a little bit because we are easily to verbalize to a cisgender audience, and that there are people who are trans who do not have a binary gender experience, right? And who do not want to, who transition but don't want to be perceived as men or women, or who don't want to, you know, they want to do a bunch of gender manipulation and magic and stuff. And I feel like it would be a disservice to us sitting up here and being, oh, you know, give us all this visibility, and not acknowledge that like there are these other perspectives that are important, and that like to get into my anthropology a little bit, I'm currently in the middle of reading a book called Reclaiming Two-Spirit, which is an histographic account of Two-Spirit people today, and also like historically. And one of the important points that the book brings up in the early chapters is that there was only, for a long time in Europe, there was only one sex. You had a penis, and everybody who didn't have a penis had an inverted penis. There was only one sex. And that was divinely ordained by God at the top, right? And that indigenous people, what we now today call Two-Spirit, which is a little bit closer. Oftentimes I feel like we talk about it in the context of it being like a non-binary gender identity, but in actuality, it's closer to the word queer, how we use queer to like an umbrella term, right? And that like oftentimes my own field of anthropology just this a lot, and it drives me fucking bananas. We have this assumption that kinship systems and the biological function of humanity is not just reproduction, but kinship systems are built around a male and female pair or a nuclear family pair. But what the book points out, interestingly, we have a bunch of examples of like moche art in Latin America that depict kinship systems that center what we now call like gender fluidity, sexual fluidity people, and that these people were the bedrock of a lot of indigenous kinship systems. And the two-sex system and two-gender system came out of Europe at the time as basically a way to say, okay, well, the good white Europeans, actually, we have two sexes and they're distinguished in two separate worlds. And the rest of the barbarians, now they have only one sex and one sexual appetite. And that's why we need to civilize them. And I think it's important to keep that history in mind when we're talking about trans experiences today, that like part of the project of, you know, we've alluded to dysphoria to today, and like not and acknowledging non-binary identities, that like sorry, I've lost my train of thought, but that kinship systems are not just nuclear hetero families, that they are diverse, and that gender desires are diverse, and that flattening them into, you know, as we've talked about today, into one path, into one experience, is part of the problem of not just trans misogyny, not just transphobia, but like colonialism itself, right, is predicated on that system.
Thank you. Like such great valid points. I think one of the best things, as difficult as we are seeing with some governments, some countries, and what we see in social media today about more the attacks on the trans community, what is amazing though is going back 6, even 10 years tops, this kind of discussion just wouldn't have happened. And I think we are really making some inroads in visibility, and that trans people have always been here. And now we just have the terms and some safer spaces to be who we are, to be authentic. And remember that not everybody does. There's a lot of people that live in fear, can only live safely in the closet, and may never have this opportunity to be out and as visible as we are to live our authentic selves, whatever that self may be. Kenny, do you have anything else to finish off with there?
I do, but I also think there's a question. Oh,
Sorry, go ahead. Yeah, you can.
Thank you, everyone. This has been fabulous. I'm wondering for the aspiring or practicing cis allies in the audience, what would you have us know? How can we use our privilege as cis individuals to further the cause?
One of the things I would say is, oh God, there's so many things I want to say to this. One is not, I'm gonna say this rather flippantly, and then we're gonna explain what I mean. Get out of the fucking way, is first off. And what I mean by that is that I sometimes feel like cis people trip over themselves to be the good cis person, that they're really, really invested in, being your friend, getting your pronouns, asking you for your pronouns, even if they already know your pronouns. And there's not enough action of one of the most influential moments for me, I have a friend who's kind of been a shepherd and maternal figure for me, who I affectionately refer to as my queer mom, that when I was starting my transition and buying clothes, she kind of pushed me into the female change room, right? And was stuck with me to make sure nothing happened. And that things like that, where you're actually building and centering community with trans women, and not just trans women, my experience as a trans woman, but with trans people, and making sure that they are protected in the gendered space that they want to exist within, is important. Not just oh, give them the third bathroom and then they can fuck off, right? I feel like is probably the most important bit, is that build community and make space for community in your gendered spaces for the trans people who are of that gender.
Protect those who are trans, especially when you know that somebody is transphobic. Stand up for them, especially if a person isn't there. And another thing is let people discover their own selves, and if don't judge how they express themselves with clothes, with makeup, because they don't fit into a certain box. For instance, do I still wear dresses? Absolutely. Do I think I look fantastic in them? Absolutely. Does that make me any less of a man? No. I think I look like a rather beautiful man in a dress, but nobody else can judge me for that and diminish my gender because of what I wear, because that is my choice. And it is our own choices to wear what we want, to express how we are, and nobody else can take that away from us. And policing that is really not cool.
Thank you for both of those perspectives that were great. Especially say some people want to like jump out there and be that strong friend. Sometimes being allies is just actually quite quiet. Very simply, like using the correct pronoun. Correcting somebody so that your friend doesn't have to correct themselves on pronouns, or just providing safe spaces that, kind of sometimes in our community, there's people that we call stealth, and, they may have moved from another community. Nobody knows who they were in the past, and they're just living as what particularly that gendered self of them is. And, for those people, that's just how they seek to be seen. And just being there alongside them. Sometimes we ask you to stand beside us in solidarity. There are times where we're tired, and you will have to stand in front of us and help fight the good fight. Being an ally means coming out to rallies. My mom's 80, and my sister had said, "Oh, why don't you go with Dee to the Pride March sometimes?" She goes, well, why would I go there? My mom just doesn't deal with change very well, but she's very, very supportive, but not realizing that, pride or queer spaces isn't just for those that identify as being queer. It's about everybody just sharing space together.
I like what everyone has said. I agree with some of what Emmy said is with, like centering trans people, centering trans voices. I think that's very important. Kind of the, nothing about us without us aspect is very important. But I also want to say visibility. And just as trans visibility is important, especially in this day and age and with the current political climate and the absolute battle that we are going through to protect our rights to openly exist, allied visibility is extremely crucial at this point in time. And we need as many of our allies to be out there showing themselves as allies, speaking to the fact that they're allies, countering the misinformation that's going on, standing up to it. We need corporations and businesses, especially ones that voice that they support queer people, at Pride and things like that. We need them to be voicing it now, and we need them to be voicing it loud and proud. And so that's my answer is, we can be up here, we can be visible, we can, be in the trenches doing what we need to do, but we're kind of like Ukraine where we're running out of ammo, and we need our support to be there in the trenches with us and to help us and to stand up with us. And so that's what I hope to see more of.
Sorry, to jump in also, not to entirely, I don't entirely disagree, but I do want to say that I don't think we as a community, and I think this is part of a problem that I've encountered a lot, and that sometimes cis allies kind of replicate, is this idea of like, oh, we need, corporations to voice their support and stuff, and like they're not voicing their support because they actually like us. They're voicing their support because they think they can get our money. And I think when we're talking about like voicing support, and when I'm talking about in centering trans voices, is that community building piece, right? That it's not just, trans people exist here and then we disappear, like you were saying, right? That like, I think I was looking, I think there's only one queer bar in the Okanagan, and it's like only open weird hours, I'm pretty sure. And like there's no Victoria, I mean, it's not like Victoria where I lived is particularly better. Their fucking queer bar, the one queer bar there is a queer and straight bar. Like it's like, I think it's really, really important for cis allies to recognize that like centering trans voices is only important when it's part of a community building project, right? That like there should be more third spaces that not just cater to like straight people, but cater to all kinds of identities and center all kinds of voices, right? Black voices, Indigenous voices, trans voices, and that the goal of the project of like what can allies do, for me at least, is to be in community, is to form that community building project, like you were saying, like being in the trenches with us, voicing that support, right?
I think a big part of it is I know that our support and our allies are the majority of the population. But we often talk about, the loud minority and the silent majority. Don't be the silent majority, be the loud majority. That's what we really need. We need to show that 365 days of the year, don't be an ally just for Pride Week. Be an ally every single day. And exactly, corporations, if you are supportive, don't just quote unquote pink wash for 1 month. Let's see that in your policies, you have solid foundation of equity, diversity, and inclusion wording in what your mission is as a company, as an organization. Equity, diversity, inclusion, social justice. These aren't just, fad words of the day, that this is the change of, the world of basically being inclusive of everybody. So I'd like to thank all of you, Jasmine, Emmy, Kenny, for participating today. Are there any further questions? Or do we have anything online? No, oh, we have a question there in the
I'm working on it. And then if I have a moment just for my closing remarks, I just wanted to share too, similar, touching on the two-spirit aspect. Here in the Syilx Nation, we've embraced gender diversity for thousands of years here, and we have 2 words that I want to share with you. One is slamia, and it describes a doe buck. And it's a deer that has antlers but has female genitalia. And so we've had that word for that doe buck again for those many thousands of years. And from that word, we also have a word stamia. And that word has been used for those thousands of years to describe queer folks, but more specifically, gender diverse folks. And so, we've had these roles, we've had, gender diverse folks being born into our nation throughout our history, and we've had that recognition and embracing, of these folks, of who we are, and that we are indeed born as who we are. Colonization has really impacted that, and one of the huge aspects of residential school was separating the genders and having the very strict gender roles and all of those things. Residential school is just one little piece of that. And then I just want to share with you today in our communities, that embracing and recognition has survived. Those words have survived, and we still continue, to embrace and recognize trans and queer folks in our communities. And that's another area of revitalization, along with language, along with other cultural aspects, that is increasing more and more. And so we do have a whole lot of support within our communities for queer folks and for trans folks. Unfortunately, due to, colonization and certain rhetorics that are out these days, there are individuals who are not there yet, or individuals who, see things very differently. But the overall majority of our communities and our people are very embracing and supportive and recognizing of who we are and who we're born as. So I just wanted to share some of that history and kind of where we're currently at, and that there's a lot of work going on to continue revitalizing our roles and how we're seen and valued in our communities. Liam.
Yeah, a closing statement, Emmy.
Can you come back to me?
Kenny.
Ooh. I want to thank everybody for listening and hearing our stories and just taking the time. It's important. These things need to be talked about. There needs to be more. I also want to say a huge thank you to everybody who has been an amazing ally, who's been really supportive, who's trying their best, and also to every young trans person that's out there that is struggling, that it will be okay. It does get better, and life is beautiful, even if it doesn't seem like it right now.
Beautiful words, Kenny. Thank you. Emmy.
Yeah, I guess I will shout out my co-host. If anybody wants my thoughts, co-host is like Tumblr but gayer after Yahoo ruined it. I'm currently in the process of writing a paper, kind of for fun, about queerness and anthropology and my problems with treated the field. If people are interested in that, that's where I'm going to be posting it. Is probably the best way to look for that if people are interested. It's the excerpt I wrote for the beginning of this panel is a very summarized version of the beginning of my arguments there. So if you're interested in that or like that, my co-host handle is Exploded Milk Porn, and that's where you can read that paper when it comes out.
Thank you very much. I'm another kind of selfish. I have also done some writing as an author. I've done lots of different posts. I am working on a book that still needs editing, but it is so far not finished yet, but it's very close. And because being the elder statesperson here, how does a person in their 40s figure out that they're transgender? So I wrote it down and figured a lot out to help me figure out. And all I got to say is, sorry, I was such a dick when I had one. And that's the title of the book. As I figured out, oh yeah, I was much better female mind. On behalf of Jasmine, Emmy, Kenny, and thank you to Okanagan College and the Department of Equity, Diversity, Inclusion, Social Justice. I'd like to thank you all for allowing us to have the voice and have the stage today, and for us all to be visible and to be visible every day. Thank you very much.
Thank you, panelists and Darrien. It's been wonderful listening to you today. We just have a little something to say thank you for sharing your time and your insights with us. Kenny, I'll go two-handed. Emmy, oops, and Jazz. Thank you very much, everyone. And thanks to everyone who's here, both in person and online.
Hey babe, I love you.